How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your sticking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Ben. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
Well, hello, and welcome to Cinema Shock. It's the podcast exploring the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. We do all the research, so you don't have to. We're the three guys that tell you everything you need to know about your favorite movies and the people who made them, so that the next time you're caught up in a nerdy movie conversation, not only will you know what is going on, you might actually be the expert. I'm one of your hosts, Gary Horde.
Hey, I'm co-host Justin Bishop. It's just the two of us again this week, Gary.
Just the two of us. Still no Todd. Can't say I blame him. Honestly, I was just thinking as I was saying the intro, I was like, is this anybody's favorite movie?
This is a lot of people's favorite movie, Gary.
Some people are experts on Jodorowsky.
They certainly are.
Well,
lots of people. We've been teasing this series for a while on social media and stuff, and we've gotten quite a response. There are a lot of big Jodorowsky fans out there, so I would say this is definitely a lot of people's favorite movie.
Well, I'll try to be nicer about my attitude then.
gotta have a positive attitude, Gary. Always bring a positive attitude into everything.
It starts off strong here, but I gotta say, I mean, I did not hate this one or anything.
Okay.
So it's gonna be all right.
It's gonna be fine. So so this is part 3 of our series on Alejandro Jodorowsky, the cinema of cruelty, as we've titled it. 3 of 4, so we are over halfway through this series, and this is the third part in Jodorowsky's people walking from one place to another trilogy.
Yes, in search
of some sort of enlightenment. This has been a theme through all of these movies so far, but I think this is the kind of the culmination of everything so far, as we'll get into as we discuss. But I guess let's just get into it, Gary. We don't have a lot of banter without Todd here doing his all of his dumb stuff. That he contributes to the beginning of the show. I feel like we're off our game a little bit.
It's the spirit of Todd and his comic bookness. I am hoping that eventually there is a culmination where El Topo, Fondo, and Lise, and the Jesus guy, the thief,
the thief, yes,
yeah, that they all end up in some sort of Avengers.
It's all, yeah. They all, wherever they were all traveling to, is all the same place.
Right.
They all end up in the same. That is a very Todd thought of that you're giving there, Gary. Todd really likes to write his own fanfic for things, doesn't he?
Yeah.
We're just gonna talk shit about Todd while he's not here.
Yeah. The other sad part about it, except for Fondo and Lise are dead at the end, I guess. So, I guess El Topo is too.
Yeah.
I was gonna say
he definitely sets himself on fire, and it's looking pretty crispy at the end of that movie. So.
I guess even if they were alive, they'd be pretty boring superheroes because they all kind of get to this place of like, I'm just cool, just sitting here,
just existing. We need more superheroes that are just cool, just existing. I think after our last episode, if you listen to it, I think we can conclude that Alejandro Jodorowsky is a divisive figure in filmmaking. And we kind of knew that going into this series. I knew when I started work on this series that this was a guy who would spark strong reactions on both sides of the aisle, both from his detractors and from his fans. And I think people listening to this, we've probably got equal parts of both of those. As I kind of joked about before, we have had quite a response to this where people are very excited that we're doing this because it's like Jodorowsky is my favorite filmmaker. And, but we're coming from this from a sort of unbiased point of view, I guess you'd say. We talked about some difficult things in that last episode, and we're not going to shy away from stuff like that ever. But that aside, I think as a filmmaker, he is an incredibly important figure. And he's controversial. I mean, this is a guy who early on in his career, well, really throughout all of his career, but especially early on in his career, he would say things in interviews with what seems like the sole purpose was getting a rise out of people, like the interviewers that he was talking to. He was, as Gary put it, an edgelord, kind of before that term ever even existed. And while we don't really condone some of his actions or words, we still think he's an artist that deserves to be discussed. Not all great art is made by great people. History is filled with people who have immense talent, but who I wouldn't, want to go out to have a beer with. But that doesn't diminish the power of their art or the importance of their art. And when we discussed El Topo, I think it was fair to say that you were generally not a fan of the movie. Is that right, Gary? Would I be fair in saying that?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it started strong and kind of petered out.
I said the same thing, even though I think I liked the movie a little bit more than you did. I kind of had the same sentiment. I mean, I kind of feel like I fell in the middle. Like I've seen El Topo several times at this point, and its first half always keeps me enthralled. I think the first half of that movie is absolutely incredible, but I do kind of lose interest in the second half. And I could care less about whether the symbolism on display makes sense or anything like that. But the truth of the matter is the second half of El Topo is kind of poorly paced, and I just kind of get bored with it a little bit in that second half. But El Topo was still a monumental moment in the history of cult cinema, and its impact on film cannot be overstated. And of course, when a guy like Jodorowsky, who was already, let's say, extremely confident in his own abilities, when he's greeted with the kind of success that he was met with in the wake of El Topo's legendary run at the Elgin Theater and beyond, well, let's just say that he doesn't get any less confident. In fact, when he set out to make his next film, his follow-up to El Topo, he said, and I quote, "Maybe I am a prophet. I really hope one day there will come Confucius, Muhammad, Buddha, and Christ to see me, and we will sit at a table taking tea and eating some brownies." Well, Jodorowsky's next movie, the film that he would hope that would lead him to that moment of enlightenment, was 1973's The Holy Mountain.
You want to know the secret? They speak of holy mountains. 9 immortal men live on top of the mountain. They hold the secret to the conquest of death. You know you cannot escape death, but immortality can be obtained. We must unite our forces to assault the holy mountain and rob its wise men of their secret of immortality.
Have you ever noticed that, I don't know whenever else to mention this, but have you ever noticed that Hodo's name in the credits is always spelled with an X?
It's very strange. I did notice that this time. It's spelled that way in El Topo as well. And if you go back to the severed heads, it's spelled like Alexandre with an E at the end instead of an
that's
O.
right.
Yeah. He did that for a long time. It wasn't until I think he started writing books later on that he started using the correct spelling of his own name. I have no idea why he decided to do that.
I've never find it either.
I've never heard him speak of it.
Yeah, the only things I could find him talking about his name were actually him talking about how his name is not complete, that originally his name is supposed to be Alejandro. Well, I should have written it down because I think there is another name in there, but basically Jodorowsky Prolansky, which was his mom's name.
Yeah.
And he said he had that for a while, but then he said, his only quote about that was basically, "It is lost now. Only my father's name prevailed."
Which, whatever that means.
Yeah. And I'm like, all right, well, you just stopped going by that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I've read in several interviews where he's talked about his name, like where the name Alejandro came from. And like in one, he mentions that he was named after Alexander the Great, which I don't that doesn't make any sense to me because in all of his other interviews he talks about how his parents kind of hated him. So why would they name him after Alexander the Great? When they, so I don't know.
That 100% is a made up thing that he said, because when I was doing research on this one, I had read a bit about him being a huge fan of Alexander the Great, so
in retrospect, he's saying that's what his parents named him after.
Well, and that started that rabbit hole happened because of looking for the name. Actually, now that we're talking about it, I was looking for the X, and some people were like theorizing that maybe it was because of his obsession with Alexander the Great that he put the X in his name.
It may very well be. I mean, that would make sense.
Who knows with this fucking guy? Yeah, I sure don't.
So, he contradicts himself a lot. Like, I mean, that's the thing. Even in interviews, he contradicts himself a lot because he is, he's writing his own mythology a lot of times. And a lot of times that comes back to bite him in the ass. Like with his quotes in the book of El Topo that we talked about last episode, then he had to recant that years later. And he's gone back and forth. Like he's always, when you're making shit up all the time, sometimes your stories get crossed and you forgot that you've already told this story and you tell it a different way,
Yeah.
Well, before he began filming The Holy Mountain, Jodorowsky and his wife Valerie, they went a week without sleep under the direction of a Japanese Zen master. Can you imagine going a full week without sleep?
I was literally, how do you even do that?
I mean, people do it, but why would you do it on purpose?
I don't know, man.
Why would if I don't get a good 7.5 hours of sleep, I'm useless the next day. I need my rest.
Yeah, even when I do the traveling and I get the least sleep that I get, I already feel like a real shithead,
just like ass the next day. I mean, we're we're in our early 40s. Jodorowsky was 45 when he made this movie, so he's a little bit older than us.
By the way, he's going to live to 125. I don't know if you knew that, but that's his prediction.
Yeah, so he's still got about another 30 years. We still got another 30 years of Jodorowsky because he just turned 94 this week as we're recording this.
Yeah, so he's got a little while left, but he is guaranteed he's got at least 125 in there.
Well, after he did this week without sleep, after him and his wife Valerie did a week without sleep, they took what is known as Eureka training, which is a process that was developed by a man named Oscar Ichazo. I looked into this guy a little bit because he's pretty fascinating. Ichazo was the son of a Bolivian general. He was a very eclectic dude, maybe even more so than Jodorowsky. His system, this Eureka training, was an amalgam of Zen, Sufi, and yoga exercises with a theoretical overlay that was derived from alchemy, the Kabbalah, the I Ching, the teachings of George Gurdjieff, if I'm saying that correctly. I've read that name a lot the last few weeks because Jodorowsky was also a student of his. He was a Russian guru. So this Eureka is kind of an amalgamation of all of these, among other esoteric doctrines. In 1973, a magazine called Ramparts described it as a body of techniques for cosmic consciousness raising and an ideology to relate to the world in an awakened way, which to me just sounds like a canned description of 100 other kind of esoteric teachings, but that's the cynic in me, I guess.
Just to throw this in there, Gurdjieff, supposedly, according to Jodorowsky, he said he met his daughter at a screening of El Topo in Mexico, and then they fucked.
Of course they did.
And he would, as they would lay in bed, he would have her talk to him about her father's teachings as she had heard them. So
it'd be really weird to be cuddling in bed after boning and start talking about dad.
Right.
Tell me about
your father. What did your dad think about this?
Well, Ichazo was about a year younger than Jodorowsky, and around the time that El Topo was being filmed, he established his first institute in Arica, Chile, which is a small town about 150 miles from Jodorowsky's birthplace. And then not long after El Topo made Jodorowsky a counterculture sensation, Ichazo moved his Eureka Institute to New York City. And in New York City, he attracted hordes of followers among the kind of hipper, showbiz demographic who were all into like this psychedelic and mystical arts. the main actors for the Holy Mountain, once they were cast, they were actually required to take 3 months of Eureka training, after which they spent a month living communally in Jodorowsky's home.
Yeah, he talks a bit about this, saying, and he brought Ichazo there to his home at one point too, apparently, and he would interact with him throughout this, but he wanted to become a guru, so he needed him to come there and teach him what that meant to be a guru. So Ichazo had to illuminate him. We can talk more about that later on what that
entails.
Yeah, what that entails. I did want to mention here too. Did you see the on the newest DVD set of the Holy Mountain? There is a whole section on Pablo later. Did you see?
Yes, yeah. His assistant. I did see that, and I watched the whole interview. It's actually pretty fascinating because he talks a lot about stuff that he talks about all of Jodorowsky's movies, up, Fondo and Lis and El Topo, and he actually had some little tidbits here and there that I didn't come across in my research on both of those films. Yeah, so I kind of wish that had been included on an earlier Blu-ray, but
yeah, I felt the same way. I was like, I wish I had seen this. What Justin's talking about. I mean, he talks. I mean, he's got like little stories about, like, I think in Fondo at least he talks about he was in that movie, but he was on a dead sow that was split in half, having quote erotic moment.
Yep.
But it was apparently so brutal they cut it. Imagine that. But I don't know. But this guy, he was Jodorowsky's personal assistant from 1967 to 1972. I'm finding myself bouncing around between Jodorowsky and Jodorowsky.
It's okay. It's all right.
We just didn't want to bother you that we had settled on Jodorowsky.
We did, but we also said that we might slip in one of the other pronunciations here and there, because
once
everyone
you see
else
enough
does.
interviews, you see enough interviews, you're like, you start bouncing around. But so anyway, he was a personal assistant. He was like a student at Hodo's theater school. Then he got a job as a mime and an actor and all this stuff. Anyway, I have a reason for bringing him up, but since you mentioned those stories, I was trying to think. I mean, according to him, he's the guy who suggested Hodo play El Topo when he couldn't find an actor to do the job.
Yeah, because they had cast a Mexican actor in El Topo who was, I guess, well known, or somewhat well known, who they didn't want to shave their head for the last act of the movie. So Jodorowsky was finally like, "Fuck it, I guess I got to do it." And yes, this guy says that it was actually his suggestion to do that.
Yeah, same with the outfit for El Topo, which I thought was interesting. Like Hodo wanted to be in cashmere wool, I think he said, and then he had suggested he had been to a S&M shop and was like, no, the sexuality and leather and blah, 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 blah. And anyway, that's why Alejandro chose the leather outfit.
Neither one is a great wool or leather is not a great thing to wear in the middle of the desert.
My favorite parts of it were also him talking about just the idea, just being a part of the behind the scenes, because you don't get much more of that besides Jodorowsky talking about it.
Yeah.
And so him talking about, like, and like El Topo, like he'd say, like, okay, I want to see her face, then her whole body, and then I want to and then she'll walk off to the right over this part, and then Krikiti, the guy who always does the shooting for him, says, oh, so you want a close-up, then a medium shot, long shot, traveling shot. And he's just like, the quote that Leader gave, he says that Jodo says, I want a fucking shit here and a fucking shit over there. Do you not understand what I want? I don't know your terminology.
Yeah, but I've seen Jodorowsky mention that in several interviews, including I rewatched Jodorowsky's Dune earlier today, and it gives a little brief overview of his career leading up to that point. And he says it in that interview too. He's like, I didn't know any of the terminology, the lenses, the lens numbers, things like that. I just he says that he came into film as a virgin. Of course, that's the terminology he would use, but he comes in not knowing anything about the technical side of film, but he knows how he wants it to look. So it was a matter, and I think that was a matter of contention between him and Korkidi a lot, because Korkidi was a professional who'd been doing this for a decade or so at this point, and Jodorowsky comes in, but he still had a very like distinct, like, I know exactly how I want this to look. It's just a matter of Korkidi having to translate that into technical terms, I guess.
Which sounds like what a lot of people have to do. Like, Pablo is talking about, he'd always have to translate, like when they're looking for casting and stuff. that, you know, if he says he wants an old woman and they try to bring him some like 70-year-old woman, he's like, no, you need to go older. He means like 120 years old.
Yeah.
And if he says fat lady, he doesn't mean 200 pounds. He means 400 pounds. And, it's just, I don't know. It seems like an interesting guy to work with. And I'm wondering if either of these guys are like ever thinking like, man, you devote all this shit to learning everything about every religion. Could you take 2 weeks for film school? Could you just maybe just, I don't know, just take a few days.
Yeah.
Just focus on being
like
a director.
I mean, he got the movies made, so I guess he didn't really need to.
I guess so. He tells the story.
I mean, Sam Raimi, we talked about the Sam Raimi series, how he would meet with, his cinematographers, and he didn't know any of the technical terms either.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. So I won't be too hard on him for this. He also helped with, like, I mean, as he gets into Holy Mountain and the bigger budget and stuff like that, though. I mean, this is the guy. I wanted to bring him up for a couple of reasons. One was just like, this guy seems to be like the ultimate other person involved in
the
all
insider,
this. Who was holding the casting sessions, like getting all the stuff done, especially in Holy Mountain, where there's like infinitely more people than there have been at any other movie so far. Also, just that he is so weirdly devoted to Jodorowsky, which when you're talking about those people staying in his house, and you kind of allude to it being kind of cult-like almost, like it seems like that's the kind of the thing this guy does. He's a cult leader.
He really is. I mean,
weird.
there is I truly believe, like, in doing all this research, I think that there could have been an alternate, like, version of history where Jodorowsky starts an actual cult. It is 100% feasible, because he somehow creates that type of devotion in people, where people think that he is this like religious figure. Like there's something about him that really draws people in. I mean, the interview you're talking about with Leader, he almost comes to tears. He chokes up several times during that interview, just talking about his experiences working with Jodorowsky.
Well, some of my favorite documentaries to watch when I'm just doing that is, like, I love cult documentaries. So there's stuff like with the Heaven's Gate cult, or I forget the name of them right now, the sex cult that was over in California that girl from Smallville was in.
NXIVM.
Yeah, NXIVM. Yeah. When you hear those stories about those cults, like they're these leaders that are like gathering information from other places. So you can almost see like Jodo's like doing the same thing and like learning how to be a guru, learning how to lead people. And then they'll do things that there's all these different ways to like program devotion in. His Leader has a story about he had to carry around lemons for Jodo for like if his mouth got dry. And then one day he forgot the lemons, and Jodo's like, how could you forget the lemons? And he's like, I'm so sorry. And he like, Jodo made him go get the lemons, which they were in the desert. This is during El Topo. And so it required him to like travel by horse like 20 miles, take a boat to another area, and to drive for 20 miles in a car to buy him lemons and come back. And you like hear these stories and you're like, this is like that in cults. They'll like do these abusive things, do them, and then you become more devoted to this person. Yeah. It's so weird. And then at the very end of the thing, through it all, who, by the way, this was the guy I was like, man, if somebody should have got asked about that freaking rape, this was probably the dude.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
Who knows what he would have said. At the very end of the interview, he's still talking about, I feel nothing but gratitude for Alejandro Jodorowsky. He talks about having a shrine with all these different religious icons all over it. And every single night he sits and he prays for Jodorowsky. And he's a fucking cult leader.
Yeah.
This guy is a nut.
He never truly started a cult, but he absolutely felt like he was on that road. like one little deviation of the road he was on, and it could have been like something. Who knows how we would have been talking about him to this day? I don't know.
Like it's like that Bill Burr bit about Kanye. Have you heard that? Where it is.
So speaking of the cast of the Holy Mountain, just like on El Topo, Jodorowsky cast himself as one of the Holy Mountain's lead roles, kind of the biggest. If there is a main role in this would be the main role. It's a character known as the Alchemist, very first character that we see in the film. And then, just as he had done on his previous films, he filled the rest of the cast with Mexican character actors, most of whom are unknown outside of their home country, or in a lot of cases with non-actors, folks he had just found on the street. And keeping with the tradition of casting his own family members in his films, his wife Valerie, who we saw in Fondo and Lis, she was cast in the role of Cell.
She is a Saturn. She's that
Saturn,
weird lady, that's doing
she's dressed like a clown the first time we see her.
Yeah, and then she's like spoiling the children and all of that stuff and turning them against the Peruvians.
Yeah, with the comic book and stuff.
Yeah. He says here, I didn't want actors. I wanted to work with people playing parts close to themselves. I had to help them evolve. In order to change the world, I had to change the actors in the film. I will work with real people and enlighten them.
Yeah, I know that in that interview with Pablo Lieder, he mentions that in, I think, El Topo, they cast some like prostitutes, and they just cast actual prostitutes.
And that's what he says. These were the prostitutes in this movie at the beginning are actual prostitutes.
Yeah, it wasn't always Jodorowsky's plan to fill the Holy Mountain with unknowns necessarily. John Lennon had actually been offered the role of the thief, but he turned it down, wanting to spend more time with Yoko. Typical John Lennon, I guess.
Oh,
when Lennon turned it down, Jodorowsky offered the role to another Beatle, George Harrison, who also turned it down, although it wasn't to spend more time with loved ones. It was because of a scene where he would be required to show his butthole. Jodorowsky said, quote, I told him that I couldn't make the film with him if he refused it. I was crazy, but for me, one simple scene was worth more than all the Beatles in the world, which is only 4.
According to Jodo, they met at the Plaza Hotel in New York, and they were both so excited. He said he went in ready to go, and Harrison said, I'll do it, except where the thief has his anus washed. I'm not showing my anus. And Jodo says, I told him you have to. This isn't just a film. This will change people's minds. You'll provide a wonderful example by leaving your ego behind. And then he refused. And Jodo said, no asshole, no film. And so he said he went back to Mexico and lost millions because of that. But I don't make films to earn money or fame. I make them to change mankind. Real dedicated to having that butthole on screen.
And you don't even see the butthole.
And you don't really see the butthole.
You don't. You see a lot of taint hair, but you don't really see a butthole at all in that scene.
I will say, for what it's worth, when that scene came on, my first sit down, and I'm doing all these by myself in my little office room here, lights out, just throw them on and just try to get absorbed into it. And this one, man, I don't know if it's the culmination of all the Jodo up until now or what, but this one was already poking at me all the way up until this. And by the time that scene came on, I was like, oh, Jesus, come on.
I mean,
literally Jesus, I guess.
Well, yeah, so almost literally. But imagine if this movie had George Harrison in the lead role, or John Lennon. John Lennon would probably showed his butthole.
The further we go along, I also am just not surprised John Lennon loved this guy.
Yeah. But I mean, this movie, it was, we'll talk about its success later, but it would have been a phenomenon probably if it had starred one of the Beatles. I mean, this is 1973, or 73, 73 when this came out. Imagine in 1973 this movie comes out and George Harrison is in the lead role. I mean, it would have been a huge movie.
I don't think he's lying when he says he left millions on the table.
Yeah, no, he absolutely did.
Yeah, I mean, I sound like I'm scoffing at Jodorowsky a lot of the times, and it's mostly just because of how ridiculous, how outrageous he can be, with the stuff he says. It's not that I think he's an idiot.
No, he's actually very intelligent.
Yeah, he's a smart dude, and he knows what he wants to get across, and he
does not compromise.
Yeah, he is dedicated to making sure that happens.
Show me the butthole.
It does. Wow. I don't know. Out of everything we've seen, this movie, The Holy Mountain, it's got some stuff in it that I'm just like, holy shit. Just when I thought we couldn't do anything else, this motherfucker comes along. He's like, I'm still gonna blow your minds, baby.
Yep. Well, when George Harrison turned down the role, Jodorowsky offered the role to Bob Dylan. He actually met Bob Dylan through Alan Klein, who, if you remember our last episode, Alan Klein was John Lennon's manager who had purchased the rights to El Topo, and he was helping him with this movie. But Dylan at the time actually had another movie, like another offer for another role in a movie, and he chose that other movie instead. He was kind of going back and forth between the two. That movie was actually Sam Peckinpah's Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. It's an outstanding movie. Stars Chris Christopherson. And
much
Dylan,
less butthole.
Yeah, from what I remember, there's a lot less butthole in it. Dylan had actually told Jodorowsky that he needed reality in his life, something concrete. He thought that doing Pat Garrett, as opposed to this metaphysical whatever thing that Jodorowsky was proposing he do, was more in line with what he was into at the time. No word on whether Dylan had any objections to the butthole scene.
Just think of all the famous butthole we could have seen.
We could have seen Bob Dylan's. Jodorowsky would later say, "It shocked me that he, being the great poet that I saw him as, would rather make a cowboy movie, that he would refuse the avant-garde to go play in a Western. I was flabbergasted." I mean, to be fair, it's not as if Dylan was just making some random Western. He was making a Sam Peckinpah movie. I mean, he was making a movie with one of the best guys to ever make a Western. So
I think Jodo, like, he expects every other artist, or at least artists he somewhat respects, to see things his way,
right?
Or to have the same exact mentality. He can't even comprehend that you would not. And so I feel like for sure Bob Dylan would be somebody that Jodo was cool with. Just those weird ass lyrics and stuff. He'd be like, yeah, this guy, I fuck with this. So he just doesn't understand when Bob Dylan's like, I don't know, man, I just want to do a regular Western.
Yeah, I just wanted to be in a Western. Well, Jodorowsky coming so close to working with some of the biggest rock stars of all time seems a little random unless you realize just how big of a figure he was in the counterculture. As we mentioned in our last episode, John Lennon was largely responsible for the success of El Topo, and he is the one who persuaded Klein to purchase the rights. And when it came time for Jodorowsky to create his follow-up to that film, it was Klein who produced the film, who produced The Holy Mountain, which was funded by John Lennon and Yoko Ono, who through Klein gave Jodorowsky $1 million to make the film. Now, some reports say $750,000, some say $1 million. Jodorowsky says $1 million. Either way, that's a big chunk of money that most of which came from John Lennon. Well, after Lennon agreed to finance the film, Jodorowsky went to Lennon's house to thank him, where he says he had the misfortune of agreeing to have him show me films that John and Yoko had made together, films that Jodorowsky called unwatchable. When a journalist from Rolling Stone later asked Jodorowsky what he thought of Lennon and Ono's films, Jodorowsky told him the truth, that he didn't like them at all. And he says, John and Yoko never forgave me. So, but I guess at that point he already had their $1 million. So,
have we seen the John and Yoko films?
No, I don't know if they've ever been released. I know that they were showing at the Elgin when El Topo premiered, but I don't know if they've ever been released or not. If they have, I don't think that I would be interested in seeing them, except out of maybe like except out of curiosity. But
I'm only mildly curious now, just because what was he producing that he thought, who's going to dig this? Probably Jodorowsky.
Right. But you know what? They're not good enough for Jodorowsky. They're not good enough for me, Gary.
Very few things would be good enough for Jodorowsky, it feels like.
Other than other Jodorowsky films.
Right.
I don't know. He talks about other filmmakers that he likes. He's a big fan of Fellini. He grew up watching all those, sci-fi movies and stuff. He's actually a big fan of David Lynch. He talks about David Lynch a lot in his in interviews, although David Lynch would come along later. So those are later interviews, well after The Holy Mountain, because we're still 5 years away, I think, from Eraserhead at this point.
I was watching stuff that he was, at this point, pretty good buddies with Kenneth Anger.
That tracks.
Yeah, and Lucifer Rising was a movie. I actually was going to bring this up in a later section of it's on YouTube. I guess they were buddies around this time, too.
Okay. I mean, that absolutely makes sense, because they're both very like avant-garde, very experimental. Kenneth Anger in a different way than Jodorowsky, but Kenneth Anger would be an interesting series for us to do here. His films are not like they're hard to analyze necessarily, but his story is fascinating, and he kind of intertwines with this story a little bit too, because he was part of that like underground film movement. Him and like Andy Warhol, Stan Brakhage, guys like that were part of that underground experimental film movement that kind of paved the way for the midnight movie movement that El Topo would begin. So the Holy Mountain began shooting in the spring of 1972. The film was shot entirely in Mexico, and just like Jodorowsky's previous films, the scenes were shot in chronological order. And this kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier about the devotion of some of the people involved in this. But the cast and crew of this film did seem to be inspired by a sort of mystical sense of purpose. In a 1972 set visit, Rolling Stone journalist Robert Greenfield was told by a production assistant on set, I think this is the most important thing going on in the world today. At the very least, it's the most far out. So those are the people who are working on that's the production assistant on the Holy Mountain. Probably someone who saw El Topo was like, I got to take a pilgrimage to Mexico the next time this guy's making a movie. I want to be there for it.
Would that have been Pablo Leder? Wasn't he a PA on a lot of the stuff or something?
I don't know. That article, which I'll link to it in the show notes, it doesn't name the production assistant. It just says a production assistant. It describes him as having long hair and a beard, I think, which was probably 90% of the people on set.
Right.
But it seems like some people were kind of joining Jodorowsky on his journey to make the Holy Mountain as if it were a religious undertaking. There's another guy, a guy named David Kapralik. He was a manager for Sly and the Family Stone, which seems random, except that Sly is one of the many rock stars that Jodorowsky met in the wake of El Topo's release. Kapralik flew himself to Mexico on his own dime for a very small kind of bit role. I mean, you can see him in the film. He's not an extra, but he plays like an American tourist in the film and kind of one of the early scenes.
Yeah, he's the guy with the video camera that poses with a soldier begging his wife, or like the thief takes the camera and films him posing, and
he's wearing like a big sombrero and like a red robe. And then later on, he's also his wife comes along again after they meet the people who are selling the Christ, the Christ for sale, and he's the one who first tries to pick up the cross, I believe, as well, because that's his wife there too. He's wearing a different outfit though, but it still has the video camera and stuff. It's just I don't know. I think it was probably Jodorowsky's take on American tourists in Mexico. I would imagine.
It was Americans are a bunch of cucks, but no. It actually was more that he does mention in the commentary that Americans don't care about the politics of the rest of the world. It's entertainment for them. They like where he gives the thief money for filming his wife getting fucked by the soldier or stuff like that. They're oblivious to any damage going on around them. It's just fun and photography, and they're cucks. He had like these people like that though, like the chauffeur for the millionaire. Well, that millionaire was apparently a real millionaire with a real house and a real art collection and all this stuff. I forget what planet that was now.
I can't remember either. Pluto, maybe. I don't know. I get them mixed up.
Yeah, and he's the one with the chauffeur, and they fuck the robot. With that big dildo,
the big old fuck machine.
Yeah, the old fuck machine. The chauffeur is played by the son of like a Hollywood producer, Harry Cohen. Like he had traveled down there to just do something,
just because he wanted to be a part of it.
Yeah, and he mentions also like the American girl, by the way, in the fuck machine scene. It's some American girl they met at a club. Her name was Ray. That's all he knew about her. And he says in the commentary, "I got her to take drugs through her ear. Nobody does that. I invented ear cocaine."
Yeah, he does put cocaine in her ear. I don't think it works that way, though. I'm not an expert by any means. I've never done cocaine, but I have to imagine it doesn't work by just sticking it in your ear.
He's real proud of things that he says he did first. So
even if they're dumb.
Even if they're dumb. I mean, he claims at one point, he was the first actor to ever use black fingernail polish. And a bunch of rock stars steal that from me later.
Sure, maybe. I don't have proof against that, so
I don't either. So I was like, man, I don't know. I was gonna go down that rabbit hole, but I decided against it.
Yeah, it's not worth the time. Well, Oscar Ichazo, remember the Eureka guy? He would frequently drop in on the shoot of the Holy Mountain, and he had two Eureka group leaders who were assigned to the project full time that were always standing by to provide any necessary Mongolian massages with a wooden spoon. Don't know. I did not Google that. What a Mongolian massage with a wooden spoon is. But if anyone needed one on the set of the Holy Mountain, they had a couple of experts there ready to administer them.
You got your wooden spoon massage.
Well, Jodorowsky would actually later sour on Eureka. After the Holy Mountain's lone Los Angeles showing, he spoke to a reporter with the Village Voice, and he said, "This is a longer quote, but I'm going to read it because it's funny." But he says, you want me to tell you about Oscar? I will tell you. He comes to me in Mexico. We will make a great movie together, says Oscar. He will train me. He will train my actors. You want to know of what his training consists? Oscar's idea of training is 2 days in a motel room with me taking LSD. I want you to know I don't need Oscar to take LSD in a motel room. I do that plenty enough on my own.
He definitely mentions it was like LSD and 8 hours of guidance. Jodo says he acts like he was prepared, like he had been training. He's like, he's going to do all these exercises with me. I'm going to have to go through these motions and stuff. And he said he got there and was like, don't waste your time. Just take this LSD. And he's like, so that's what I did.
Just tripping in a motel room.
But he said you did teach him the Enneagram, so which is the 9 personalities that he used that. So
some of the reading I read said that Ichazo invented the Enneagram, that he was the one who came up with that. Now another place I read or I saw in a documentary, I can't remember, said that it was, who's the Russian guy we were talking about, Gurdjieff?
Yeah, Gurdjieff.
Gurdjieff, yeah, that guy. So another place I saw said that he actually originated it. But remember that Ichazo was a student of his or studied his stuff, so it's possible that he took some of his ideas and turned them into the Enneagram. I'm not really sure. I don't know. I'm no expert on that by any means. But if you start researching Ichazo, I mean, he is considered kind of the father of the Enneagram, and that's the symbol that you see the alchemist wear on his pendant, and it's also on that giant table that they all sit at the end. That's the symbol for the Enneagram. Well, as seems to be the case in all of Jodorowsky's films, this shoot was a somewhat difficult one, shooting with a low budget, comparatively low budget. I mean, big for Jodorowsky, but compared to the scope of the film he was trying to make, this is a pretty low budget, and he's shooting in the middle of scorching deserts with a cast comprised of mostly non-professionals. That can make things a little bit challenging, and shooting in consecutive order honestly kind of adds to that challenge. And then bringing in all sorts of animals and then dressing them up in little conquistador outfits probably presents an even bigger challenge to the filmmakers.
He says the frogs pissed acid, and then they blow them. What?
Literally?
I mean, he kept saying it. They pissed acid, and then they'd blow themselves up. Not literally. He'd do that later. Jodo would do that. But they would blow themselves up extra large so that the outfits, when they put them on, then they'd slide right off so they could get out of them. And the chameleons were hard because they didn't move. So he said they would have to sit there for hours, just waiting for the chameleons to do something, and he'd be screaming at them to move, and they'd finally make a movement. But he apparently knew a guy at a zoo. He would load them to him at night so he could get some animals. I mean, I don't know about the frogs. I think this was most of the other animals that were on the set.
Yeah, I was going to say, because the frogs and the chameleons are definitely during the day.
They're
sunlight.
Yeah, and if you're wondering why, toads because they're soft, and chameleons because they're immobile and perfect. I don't know what that means.
That's why.
Yeah. And the monkey, his name was Chucho Chucho.
Yeah, he was in a couple other movies before this.
Yeah, they legitimately taught him to meditate. So
it's it's impressive, honestly, when we do see him meditating. One day during the shoot of The Holy Mountain, a riot nearly broke out among the extras. This is a recurring theme, I guess, riots in Jodorowsky movies. But the story, this comes from that same Rolling Stone article that I mentioned earlier, but was that they'd been kind of difficult all day, restless and kind of constantly moving out of position. And eventually the tension got to the point where the police were brought in. The leader of the group, I guess they were forming a mob. The leader of this group of extras told Jodorowsky, "You are only playing with goats." I think he's speaking of the crucified goats we see in the church scene. He continued to say, "We need them to eat. Give them to us when you are finished." But unknown to them, the goats were not Jodorowsky's to give away. They had apparently been rented.
Yeah, he rented them from a restaurant, and he had to return them once he was done so they could be served. So
somebody ate those goats after this movie.
So somebody out there can say they ate a piece of Holy Mountain.
That's so funny. Well, I mean, the filming of The Holy Mountain is filled with these kinds of stories. A lot of them thanks to that Rolling Stone article that I mentioned, although he was only there for a couple of days, so he's only hitting on certain things. I do wish that there was more information about some of like the set building and things like that, because the sets in this, I mean, Jodorowsky designed all the sets himself and they look incredible. I want to know how the fuck machine got made. Like, that thing is an impressive piece of just equipment, whatever it's made out of. Like, when you see it open and transform, like, I want to know who designed that, who did that. But unfortunately, there's just not a lot of that kind of information out there about this, at least not that I found. This was a much bigger shoot, of course, than anything Jodorowsky had done before. Tons of extras that he would not have previously been able to afford, much more complex special effects, more elaborate locations, more intricate sets, including a soundstage they had for about a month, which was actually the first soundstage that Jodorowsky had ever used on any of his films.
I will say, in the commentary track, since I'm usually the one that listens to those, this one's way more, he's less interested in telling you details about production than what he's trying to convey with the symbols and that sort of thing. And so every once in a while he slips into stuff, and I've got some cool quotes for later. But I mean, he does slip into a few stories here and there about, like, I mean, he talks about how, like, some of the sets were built to, like, they can, like, it almost sounds like they would, like, fold into something else. So, like, the Rainbow Room would be one thing, and then it could, like, turn into something else pretty easily or whatever. Yeah. And he rented out these, like, warehouses and have, like, retired workers, or, like, in one scene there's, like, old people. He, like, shuttled them from an old folks home or whatever it is. Said they were, like, constantly soiling themselves or something. Of course. It was just, it was real weird. He does have some interesting stuff from there. Was like, I did like hearing about, there's a scene where, like, it was homosexuals, he said, but, like, it was the soldiers dancing with the people, and he was trying to convey that, like, during this time, this is sort of a mix of what he said and what I was reading about, but, like, Latin America was having a lot of stuff with authoritarian governments taking over and that sort of thing. Just recently, the Mexican government had been involved in a thing with shooting a bunch of college kids, and nobody had wanted to touch that, and he, of course, did. So, like, that truck full of, like, the bodies in the back, and then you see the people in shirt and tie, like the schoolgirl skirts or whatever, and they get shot by, like, the army guys in mass and stuff. This is all touching on this, like, Mexican thing where, like, they had killed some college kids during a protest.
Well, yeah, that's what we talked about during Fondo and Lis. Remember, that was kind of why it was so tense when that movie premiered. Yeah.
Right. But then he was trying to convey with, like, civilians dancing with the soldiers, like in that one scene, because he was trying to convey that they're the same, they're equal. Civilians are just soldiers without uniforms. He was trying to, it's a weird, like, he's trying to convey that, like, everybody's the same, and it's just like these different little things can push you into another. I don't know. He said during the time, like, the church had just published a book against him. They called him ahead of time and said, when they heard he was filming, that the president likes you, but we've had complaints. Don't do a movie that involves soldiers, firefighters, any kind of, like, servants, like public servants. Basically, it sounds like the government's been good to you, but it could get really bad really fast. He says, so essentially they threatened his life, is what he said. It was talking about around the dancing scene. He said a crazy Charo pulled a gun and said, stop filming this movie or I'm going to kill you. And he said he went insane. He said, if you kill me, I'll kill you. And then the Charo, like, got scared and left. He said, I risked my life for this scene. Who knows how much of this is actually accurate.
Always a grain of salt.
Yeah. But it was kind of interesting. He said the government and the church and everybody was kind of fighting with him. In fact, if going back to that Pablo later interview, he talks a little bit about this as well. They were doing stuff like the tower that the thief climbs, which just was insane. I would shit my thong if I was climbing that tower. That he, without a permit or anything, had not talked to anybody and just built a room on top of that tower with a hole in it. And brought in a helicopter. And there's photos you can find and stuff too, like, of them landing in there. But they had an actor dressed as a cop and stop traffic and everything. And they filmed that whole scene. Yeah.
So that tower already existed, then they built the room on top of it, basically. You have to wonder, though, how could they construct that on top without somebody like questioning why?
I don't know.
That's what I thought when I heard that story, because that's one that I did hear.
Yeah, they said it was a Ciudad Satellite. I think it's the name of the place or something. But when they were driving the bodies through the streets and stuff, and it has the women ironing and stuff, the church accused him of holding a black mass with the lambs of the crosses and stuff. So he was going to get expelled from the country. It was around that time they said that that the government was threatening them then, and they were worried that the government was going to pull the film or stop filming, and then the film would get quote unquote lost.
Yeah.
And so he said that Jodorowsky was going to get expelled from the country. When he got that threat from the church too, he left and went back to New York for a while, and he called Pablo and told him, like, we've got to get the film here. They said that they were worried that something would happen to the film if they requested it. And so they started a story about how in LA they were going to do a screening celebrating this is a Mexican thing, so forgive me if I get this wrong. It was like Charro Negro. It's like
the
Charro.
Black Charro, which is a film series.
Yeah, and they were going to do that. So they were celebrating that. So they requested that film, and like the son of Black Charro and Black Charro's Revenge and stuff like that. But instead, Pablo went in there and they had to tie together all the holy mountain reels that they had and take it back across the border.
Saying that it was El Charro Negro.
Yeah, that's how they got it out.
Wow, that's wild. That is crazy. Well, it was completed just in the nick of time to screen at the 1973 Cannes Film Festival, where it was highly anticipated. But once it was shown, it was kind of coolly received. There was another film called Le Grand Buffet, which was directed by Marco Ferreri, and that ended up being the year's most scandalous Cannes screening. And Alan Klein, kind of seeing its potential, picked up that film's American rights.
When it screened at Cannes, he said he had to submit under a country, and he was very adamant about this. He says, quote, "My country is my shoes." And so he said, but because of where he had filmed a lot of it, he said that it would be Mexico. He said that Mexico didn't want it.
Yeah, they didn't want to claim it.
Yeah, they didn't want to claim it. And he says because there were no charros in the movie, but he said that was what affected his results at Cannes.
Well, after the Cannes screening, Jodorowsky trimmed about 20 minutes from the film, eliminating as much dialogue as he could. And then both it and Le Grand Buffet were scheduled to open in New York later that fall in 1973. And Klein had high hopes for Le Grand Buffet, but he was a little more uncertain about the Holy Mountains prospects after its lukewarm reception at Cannes, and determined to, as he said, protect Jodorowsky from the critics, Klein restricted the Holy Mountains New York run to Friday and Saturday midnights at the Waverly Theater. The Waverly Theater was another theater that was pretty significant in the history of midnight movies, as it would later become the original home of the midnight screenings of the Rocky Horror Picture Show just a couple years later. The Holy Mountain opened in New York on November 29th, 1973. And despite Klein's disappointment, the Holy Mountain could not really be seen as a failure, not at least as a midnight movie. It didn't, wasn't breaking box office records, but as a midnight movie, it was highly successful, and it ran midnights at the Waverly continuously for 16 months, all the way up and through the first week of April in 1975. Outside of New York, the Holy Mountain was screened as a double bill with El Topo in most markets, although there were several major markets where it wasn't released at all, most notably in Los Angeles. Although it was shown in LA on March 30th, 1974 at the Filmex Film Festival for what was described as the American premiere, it never screened there again at all during its original run.
I can't even fathom a double bill of El Topo and the Holy Mountain.
You better be doing some good drugs or something before you
I know, for real.
Although Jodorowsky would not say that. He would say that the movie is the drug. And
that's true.
That's what's going to get the reaction from you, just the experience of watching the movie.
I'm just saying somebody better hit me with some ear cocaine quick.
Well, because of its unique release, tracking down reviews of the film from its original run proved to be kind of difficult for me. Although I did find an article in the New York Times from January of 1974 written by T.E.D. Klein. And I'll try to link this in our show notes as well. But this article, it's really not a review. Although the writer does describe the film as being filled with dime store mysticism, saying, quote, "It squanders a truly incredible amount of props, images, and money, all to little effect, for Jodorowsky tries so hard to be shocking that, in the end, he becomes merely monotonous. He reminds one of a Fellini without the feeling." And that article, which is called "They Kill Animals and They Call It Art," goes on to describe the various animal deaths or dead animals that are seen on screen in the Holy Mountain, and then uses the film as a jumping off point for a discussion about animal cruelty in films, using more well-known films like the previously mentioned Peckinpah film Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, Dennis Hopper's Kid Blue, Frank Schaeffer's Patton, as other kind of recent examples. This article is a really fascinating glimpse at a moment in film history when people decided that something should maybe be done about this. And the involvement of the American Humane Association became a regular occurrence on film sets. You know, when you see at the end of the films, no animals were harmed during the filming of this movie. That's the American Humane Association, that they usually put a representative on set anytime that animals are being used. That wasn't always the case. Especially not prior to the early 70s, mid 70s. Although it should be noted that I don't think any of the dead animals that we see in this film were killed for the sake of being in the film. Like we mentioned, the goats or the lambs earlier had been rented a local restaurant. There were dead animals that were taken from butcher shops and things like that. The only animals that might have been killed during the filming of Holy Mountain were probably the frog conquistadors, who definitely looked like they got blown up. Like they definitely look like they exploded. Other than that, though, I don't know that there were any animal deaths in this, although there were in El Topo, as we mentioned last week.
There was also the dog fight, and I could not find anything that mentioned that directly.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that.
And that
you don't really see them biting each other. It's more like them that I remember. I could be misremembering it. So I'm not sure if I honestly don't know about that one myself.
Well, I know it's going to get brought up in some of the reviews of the film, or when we get to nap time. And this is what I told myself to help myself sleep at night, is I have seen other movies where there were dog fights. I feel like we covered one maybe, but I can't remember exactly where I remember this. But they covered the dogs in honey or something,
right? Yeah,
and they were going ham on each other and just lick at each other and stuff, and not
sure. There are lots of movies where they feature dog fights. Snatch is the first one that comes to mind for me, but where the dogs are not actually fighting; it's simulated, because it's a movie. Yeah. Although with Jodorowsky, who the hell knows? But I couldn't find anything about it that really said one way or the other as far as this
hard
movie.
To fake the slow motion frog bodies flying though. So.
Yeah, unless they're not real frogs, unless they were frogs.
I guess that's true.
But aside from that article, I couldn't really find any other reviews from the time of its release. I looked, I could not find reviews of this movie from 1973, 1974. But if the last two episodes have been any indication, I feel like there's probably no shortage of modern day reviews to be found for The Holy Mountain.
Well, Justin, you're absolutely right. There are plenty of people online who have seen The Holy Mountain. Not only do they need to take a nap, we're probably going to need a nap after I go through them. So let's get started with Somebody Needs a Nap. I tried to get a bunch of quick hits, so hopefully this goes well and Justin doesn't have to edit too much. Let's see here. BJ says Russ Meyer on LSD. That's the review title. Pseudo-intellectuals and wannabe elitists. Rejoice! Your movie has arrived. A film so artsy-fartsy, so pretentious, so Euro-trashy, that it's the perfect film to pretend to like in a vain attempt to impress people you feel mentally inferior to. Behold, I give you The Holy Mountain. Do you boastfully tell people that you listen to NPR, but don't even know what NPR stands for? Watch The Holy Mountain. Do you sit in the corner of your local hipster coffee shop pretending to read a book containing the writings of some 19th century European philosopher? Watch The Holy Mountain. Do you mock religion, yet worship at the altar of an 80-year-old communist from Vermont? Watch The Holy Mountain. You know who you are.
Oh no. Oh no. That guy. I don't want to be friends with that guy.
Let's see. Sheepdog says, quite possibly the greatest insult to your intelligence you will ever encounter. Compile the most depraved, ambiguous, crude thoughts you can imagine. Write them down, act them out, film it, describe it as beyond criticism, and unlike any cinema before it, you'll have this movie. I'm embarrassed for any individual that believes there's meaning to this movie beyond a compilation of the writer-director's sickest, most revolting thoughts and desires. This film makes Lars von Trier appear brilliant. It's absolute garbage in every way, shape, and form. David says, holy crap, this is a jumbled up mind trip. My dreams are messed up, but at least I have the common courtesy to not share them with the world. I sat through the entire thing, and I was not entertained. Did not have any deep revelations, was not challenged intellectually. It ended with a complete feeling of having just wasted an hour plus of my life. I will never watch another Jodorowsky film again. This one says, Manos with a bigger budget. Give a zero talent perverted drug addict money, he'll direct and star in The Holy Mountain.
Is that the whole review?
That's the whole review. This one says 1 star. It says avant-garde. I assume they mean avant-garde. They speech to text. Avant-garde and pretentious is one thing. Trying to make something original and different is one thing, but to do so at the expense of innocent animals is unforgivable. The director of this film needs to be arrested. Filming and killing any living creature for some piece of so-called art is a travesty. And there's a few like that.
I'm not going to argue against that.
All right, let's keep it going. We're in letterbox territory now, so now it just gets hot. Aigo says, wow, that was fucking shit. Never have I seen a movie so fucking full of itself. The definition of pretentious. Also, thorough job of abusing animals for your shitty political opinions in a shitty movie. I fucking hate this garbage.
Not a fan, huh?
Not a fan. No Brian says, I would literally give this movie negative stars if I could. This is the hardest watch I've ever seen, and I absolutely hate it. This film is the epitome of pretentious film bros slapping a bunch of random shocking shit on screen and calling it symbolic. Not only is there crazy blatant sexism in almost every scene, but there's also borderline child porn. Not even to mention the live animal abuse throughout the movie. Killing frogs and abusing animals for no reason. There's a real dogfight in this movie. Why? I tried my best to understand this because it's rated so high on Letterboxd, but I just can't agree. Worst movie ever.
Oh, there it is. We haven't had one of those in a while.
Yeah. Freddie says, I threw up, and it was this film's fault. Zoblis says, someone looked at El Topo and thought, amen. The rampant misogyny, animal killings, awful pacing, heavy-handed symbolism, and narcissism in this are all great. It just needs more money and more borderline child pornography. I guess I should give this some credit for at least having more interesting set design than El Topo, but that only makes the viewing experience marginally less miserable. If I never see another Jodorowsky film in my life, it will be too bloody soon.
Sounds like you should have read that in a British accent.
Yeah, it does sound that way. Jackson says, I hated nearly every minute of this. 1 star, though, for Chucho. Then it comes back and says, edit, forgot about the butt stuff, 0.5 star.
What butt stuff? Oh, the butthole?
Yeah, I guess so. And there's that one where it's art and they poke in the butt.
Oh, yeah, they stick his finger in it. Yeah, like twice.
Yeah. Captain Shimmy says, I didn't know a movie could be so irritatingly obtuse and painfully heavy-handed at the same time. Pretentious rat fuckery masquerading as art.
It's the first time we've heard the term pretentious rat fuckery in one of these reviews, I think.
That is true.
So points for originality.
This review is a 0.5 star, and it's just in all caps and italic. Jesus shitted?
Yeah, but it got turned into gold, my dude.
Let's see. Pumpkin Possum says, 0.5 star, one of the worst, most obvious, obnoxious, pretentious, and heavy-handed movies I've ever seen in my entire life. The cinematic equivalent to watching someone on acid sucking themselves off while thinking they're incredibly profound for doing so. I despise this movie and the shallow cult-like performative film bro love and praise it gets more than life itself.
People who don't like this movie really don't like this movie.
I know this was you said somebody needs a nap. Boy, do I have some people that need a nap. Danny, about 20 minutes in, and what the actual fuck am I watching? About 40 minutes in, and I'm thinking about cross-referencing the FBI Most Wanted with all of you who have given this a positive review. About 45 minutes in, if I took a film class and they showed this movie, I'd fucking drop that class. About 70 minutes in, can this movie fucking end? I guess the silver lining here is that now if anybody asks me the worst movie I've ever seen, I have an answer.
Wow, twice we've heard that.
Okay.
I know these people do know that you can hit stop.
I guess so. I don't know. 1 star, incredibly insufferable, pretentious, gross, and full of shock value, which even in context of 1973 was not anything special. Unpleasant watch due to its content, literally killing animals on screen, included, of course, and overall campiness being just fucking boring and lame, only giving it 1 star because of the set design. If you think this movie is actually deep, you're lying to get laid. Jodorowsky is a cult figure the same way L. Ron Hubbard was.
Wow. No, less successful.
Yeah. I like this one because it's real vague. 1/2 star. Count your fucking days, Alejandro.
Whoa. That's going to kill him. Wow.
All right, I'm going to go with Liza at the movies for my final review here. She gave it a 1/2 star. These were 2 pretty solid ones, but I like the funny short ones. Anyway, Liza says, I watched this movie for the first time in 10th grade when my then boyfriend and I ran the film club with our friends. And this was picked as one of our first weekly assignment movies. I should have known he was a total psycho because when I raised my ethical qualms with any filmmaker killing dozens of live animals on screen to make a point, he said, who cares? They're lizards. I hated this movie then, and I hate this movie now. Watching it again as an adult, this film to me is the epitome of what happens when narcissistic artists tote their cold takes under technically skilled window dressing. Yes, this film is beautiful visually. Yes, the celestial themes are fun. I left a 1/2 star for the members of the crew responsible for the artistry therein. But this movie is full of philosophically scrawny messaging, self-indulgent nonsense, a complication for complication's sake, not to mention the animal abuse. It is Jodorowsky jacking himself off and yelling to the world, I am not like other artists, I am mocking other artists. It's a commentary through imitation. I'm so very different and so very pure. I, for one, am over being told that this is the best that art house has to offer.
Yeah, so those people didn't like this movie. So, but I think that people always feel strongly one way or another. Nobody's kind of like so on Jodorowsky. It seems like most people, I'm sure there, there are people, but for the most part, the reactions you see of him are either like complete devotion, like this is my favorite filmmaker, or people fucking hate him. I mean, there are people in between. I think me and you probably fall.
I was about to say, I feel like I'm as so as you could get on Jodorowsky.
For me, when someone says, like, when someone mentions Jodorowsky, I think it's the visuals from the Holy Mountain that kind of come to mind, especially those in the first half of the film when, like, we're inside the Alchemist Tower and things like that. Those are some of the most well-known visuals of his career. And like all these like AI generated things that we've seen on the internet in the last couple of months. Remember the Jodorowsky's Tron thing that like made the rounds a while back? Yeah. Those are all pulling their visual styles from mostly from the Holy Mountain, some from his unmade Dune project, but mostly they're using the Holy Mountain, the visuals here, as a reference on that. So while El Topo might have made Jodorowsky a celebrity, a counterculture figure, I think that the Holy Mountain might be his most seminal work. That doesn't mean it's his best work, but I think it's his most seminal work. And putting aside personal feelings about Jodorowsky the man, Jodorowsky the filmmaker, or more accurately, I think Jodorowsky the artist, which is probably how he would consider himself. I think he's kind of firing on all cylinders here with all of his visual flourishes and mystical stylings full tilt. Now, whether that resonates with you or not, I think it comes down to the viewer, because a lot of the like mystical stuff, a lot of the philosophy is, as some of those reviews said, a little bit jumbled, but it's still a hell of an experience, I think, as a film. It truly like a unique experience. Now, this was your first time seeing this, Gary, is that correct?
That is correct.
So I know you were kind of not a huge fan of El Topo. Like you liked the first half. You liked Fondo and Lisa a little bit better, I believe. Where does this fall for you? What did you think about the Holy Mountain? What did you know about the Holy Mountain before coming into this?
I literally knew nothing about the Holy Mountain before this.
You'd never seen photos, like stills or anything?
I saw the photos like as I was ordering the DVD and stuff like that, but like I had no idea. I mean, I've seen the obvious stuff about the guy in the thong, like in the rainbow room or whatever.
Yeah,
but,
that's the scene that's probably the most referenced.
Yeah, I don't think I'd seen much at all out of this movie.
Well, how did you feel about it upon first watch then, I guess?
I mean, I'm not going to lie. I got kind of nauseated too, like some of these reviewers. But
by what though? Like what specifically?
I don't know. Maybe the Jesus shitting in a glass jar, or the guy getting his balls cut off, or
yeah. The you didn't like the room, the collection of 1,000 testicles?
No,
just balls in a jar.
Maybe the old man's like practically sucking on a little girl's hand while he pops out his glass eye. Like,
what about the hermaphrodite that titties turn into leopards and then spray milk all over the guy?
There was that. I mean, at least that felt like a Tim and Eric sketch. Yeah.
Oh man,
it's tough. I say this legitimately. Like, I feel like I'm the most so on Jodorowsky, because like the reviews that like talk about him like this making no sense and this is meaningless or yada yada yada, I can't agree with that. Like, I think the dude, and especially, I mean, you know, if I went through the whole commentary just to tell you what he says about each thing, it literally took me hours to get through the commentary, because I was just like, okay, wait, pause, let me look at this. Like, and because there's so much shit just like piled in. What it really made me do, honestly, when I was watching this, is like question how I felt about art. I feel like that's a really broad way of putting that, but like
that's very deep. It's a very deep way of putting that.
I know, it almost makes me like, this is profound. This is the revelation that he's trying to provide. Maybe I don't know.
Gary, have you reached enlightenment?
I might have reached enlightenment. But, because I'm watching it and I'm thinking to myself as I'm watching it, I'm like, this fucking edgelord is back at it. He's like just throwing shit on screen. And then even when the first time watching it through, when I'm trying to tell myself, no, he's got meaning. You know, he's got meaning. What's the meaning? Let's try to trace the progression here of what's happening. And even then I'm like, this fucking guy has like, he's just obsessed with religions, you know?
Yep.
And so like, it's like, oh, I get that. Like, I love stuff. I've got like a little Buddha back here, and I grew up Christian, and, you know, and I don't hate religion. I'm not even like a person who's like aggressively atheist or something, you know, like I think there's advantages to be had and like all of these. So it's like part of me is like, I get it. He's like into all of these things. He's like trying to combine it, and like he's throwing in all these symbols, all this religious iconography and into these things, but he's like saying it's not necessarily in those things. It's like you can find enlightenment in yourself. Anyway, God, I feel like I could go on about this for an hour, but I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to say, I never look at his stuff and think that it's meaningless or he doesn't have a point to it. Right. I don't know how I feel about him sometimes. It's easy to just default to the guy's a fucking perv himself, and so fuck him. But as an artist, as the art, it's like, this is not my go-to stuff that I want to see all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that some of it's extreme for extreme's sake. I can believe that. But then also he knew that going in. And so it's like, fuck, he's so frustrating, because it's just like, he knows what he's doing. I think he knows what he's doing, and I think he's smart. I don't know. It's like so again, just to try to put a bow on it of all that nonsense I just said, is that he bothers me because I think he is an edgelord still, and his bullshit that he tells, like his stories that he tells about the making of the film and all that. It seems like he's a guy who's read a lot of books, who's just trying to throw it all up on a screen and like all that. But there is a narrative. There is like an actual coherent story as he's going through it. So it's like, fuck, who am I to say that this guy's art is not legit? You know, like, how can I say that? Like the guy clearly has a purpose for what he's done here. And so, anyway.
I mean, all art is subjective, I think. And that's something you have to think about when you're talking about movies. I mean, especially movies that are made to be art. And that's not every movie. Not every movie is attempting to be art. When I go see Fast 10, I'm not going to go into that thinking it's trying to be high art, although it may achieve that. Who knows? But that's not what all movies are trying to be. A lot of movies are just trying to be entertaining. Jodorowsky is an artist who is making art, and good art should not be loved by everybody, I don't think. I think part of the power of good art is that it can be shocking or in your face or divisive. Now, when we talked about El Topo, one thing that I talked about a little bit was how that movie was kind of a product of its times. El Topo, as I mentioned before, is like, it's about half a good movie. The second half gets a little boring to me. But I also don't have the benefit of having seen it during its initial run. And I think a large part of why El Topo became the cult sensation that it was is because it was the perfect film to be released at the time that it was released. It was very much a product of its time, when the late 60s, early 70s, when the counterculture was in full swing. If it had been released 5 years earlier or 5 years later, I don't think it would have had as big of an impact. And similarly, I think that The Holy Mountain is very much a product of its time. This was a time in history, this is just a couple years after El Topo, when Western esotericism was being explored in ways that it never really had before. And Jodorowsky, having been steeped in esotericism for years, was kind of the perfect vessel to put these ideas on screen. He wasn't doing it because it was the trendy thing to do at the time. This was, he is, for all his good and bad about this guy, he is genuine in his beliefs. Like, he's not doing this stuff, I don't think, as a way to necessarily like just be weird for weird's sake, to like get people's attention. I think that's who he is. I really truly do. And I do think that that The Holy Mountain is kind of a culmination of what Jodorowsky had been doing with the Panic movement since the early 60s. So as a reminder, we talked about it during our Fondo and Liz episode, but the Panic movement, which was founded by Jodorowsky, Fernando Arrabal, and Roland Topor, it was this kind of like art collective that created violent, surreal, avant-garde works, everything from stage plays to novels to music and film, with the aim to, as Arrabal put it, release destructive energies in search of peace and beauty. And so their works were purposely kind of shocking and in your face. They were designed that way. And The Holy Mountain is kind of the embodiment of everything that movement stood for, as well as arguably the most artistically successful piece of the movement. And it served as kind of a send-off for the Panic movement, because Jodorowsky would disband the Panic movement that same year. So Arrabal released a book called La Panique, and when he released that, Jodorowsky saw that as kind of like, we've said everything we need to say with this. So it's hard, when you talk about this movie, it's one of those movies that I feel like watching it 50 years later, it doesn't have that quite the same impact as it would have if you'd seen it at the time, because it is very much a product of its time. And it's a movie that benefits, I think, from knowing the context in which it was originally seen.
Do you know it's funny that you say that? Because I was watching it, but I was putting it there. Like, I felt like as I was watching it, that's exactly where my brain was. It's like, I could see John Lennon being behind this. I could see, like George Harrison potentially wanted to start. This is the Beatles after, this is pretty much at the end of the Beatles run. So they've gone like full fucking weirdos, at this
Yeah.
point or whatever. And it feels like the stuff that John Lennon would be approaching with like his solo stuff or whatever, so it felt like in that time period, it's like, this is for that part of culture, this would have been a big deal. This is that spiritual enlightenment thing.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense that it would have caught on with that counterculture at the time. Now, of course, this kind of touches on what you were saying, but you kind of have to ask the question, what does it all mean? I mean, that's a loaded question, but that's what a lot of people are trying to do when they watch this movie. And like I said with El Topo, trying to decipher what each and every thing that Jodorowsky is throwing on screen, what all it means, is kind of a fool's errand. The Holy Mountain is, and I think it's primarily about the experience of watching it. It's about how the visuals, all the symbols that he's throwing, combined with the soundscape, which I think we haven't talked about, I think the music in this is pretty outstanding, which was partially written by Jodorowsky as well. But I think it's all about how all of that combined makes the viewer feel. It's more of an emotional or visceral experience than strictly like an intellectual one. Whereas someone like David Lynch, to reference probably the most popular surreal quote unquote filmmaker, David Lynch will use surrealistic touches as a dramatic device, where they're kind of weird things will happen, but they're intertwined within the plot of the film. A lot of the stuff that Jodorowsky does in this movie and in his other ones as well, but especially in this one, don't really have any impact on the film's plot, like the scene that you referenced earlier of the soldiers, the men dancing together, that they're just like walking by and they see this party where there's a band playing and there's all these people dancing, and it's all men, just a soldier dancing with like a civilian. Now Jodorowsky in the commentary will explain to you what that means, but it has nothing to do with the plot of the movie at all.
I know David Lynch and him have some crossover, and Lynch is apparently a fan as well, but it's like, I always feel like with Lynch, there's still like a movie happening.
Yeah.
And like with Jodorowsky, it feels like there was that one Nap review that I read that like the guy was like, at least I have, the courtesy to not share my dreams with everyone. And it's like, that is how Jodorowsky stuff comes across. It's like a fucking dream. Like somebody's just writing out the thing they had a dream about last night.
Yeah. No, I see that. And I mean, but like you said, there is a plot, but there are just a lot of elements that aren't connected to the plot at all that he's throwing in there because they mean something to him, I guess. And you mentioned also before the film's symbolism being steeped in religious iconography. I mean, the thief is clearly like supposed to be a doppelganger of Jesus Christ. I mean, we see him. He's like, they create a plaster mold based on him, and they turn it into a crucifix. And then we later see him eating the face of one of those, which what does that mean? I don't know what that means. Like, I don't have
it's made out of almond paste, and on the DVD you can get the recipe for it if you want.
So if you want to create your own edible Christ. But I don't think you can try to think of what all those things mean, but I don't think the film warrants or I don't think the film necessarily lends itself to literal analysis like that, which is what a lot of people want to do. With all movies, not just with these, but with all movies, I think they want to be like, oh, yes, I know exactly what that means. Sometimes you can have an idea of what it means, but whether you're right or not, in the end, doesn't really matter because it can mean whatever the hell you want it to mean. And I think that's how Jodorowsky would probably want it, is for you to find what it means to you, the viewer, because it's a personal experience.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe that's the answer to the question I was about to ask, which is like, one of the things that kept bothering me is like, he's talking through the commentary or like interviews about, I make movies to change the world. And like, this is going to like evolve mankind or whatever shit he says. And then I'm like, who do you think is watching this? And, and like, who do you think is watching this? And it's just going to like all of a sudden trigger something and be like, fucking enlightened. I'm here.
Right. Here I am. I've arrived.
Right. Like, I don't know. It's like, do you really think that like people are just going to watch this and be like, what the fuck is this guy on? Like,
Right.
what is happening? You know?
Yeah. Well, you got to also remember that the dude has an ego the size of Texas, you know, like he of course he's going to think that his movie is going to change the world. You want to talk about the ending?
Sure.
Yeah, because that's pretty divisive. Well, first of all, before we get to that, I want to say, like, as far as like the movie itself, I like this movie a lot. I think this is his best movie that we've talked about so far. I do think that visually, that first half especially is absolutely stunning. Keep in mind, Jodorowsky, he is the director, the writer. He co-wrote the music. He co-edited the film. He is the set designer and the costume designer. Like, that is incredibly impressive. And for the fact that this movie was made for less than $1 million, for it to look as good as it is also very impressive. My favorite part of the movie is actually the first 20, 25 minutes or so where there's no dialogue. The thief's journey to the tower and through the tower. I think that's the best part of the whole movie. I think it's some of the strongest filmmaking that we've seen from Jodorowsky so far. It only gets ruined when Jodorowsky's character opens his fucking mouth, which is symbolic in itself, I think.
That ending, if you're talking about the part where they're all sitting around the table, I literally wrote down, like, as I was watching it, because I'll just keep my little notebook with me, and I wrote down, what if Mel Brooks was a Hare Krishna?
That's good. But this was before Blazing Saddles.
Yeah.
By a year or so, right? So well, okay, the ending. Well, to get to that ending, I think that this movie has some of the same problems that El Topo does, and that it's very, like, the first half of it is a lot more interesting than the last act. I think the stuff in the middle is interesting, where we're getting introduced to the 9 different travelers, you know. It's like these little short films that are kind of fun.
Right.
Fun's maybe not the word, but interesting. I think they're all pretty interesting. I do think that it runs a little longer than it should. The movie in general is probably a little longer than it needs to be. And it does lose some steam in the second half, and it drags a little bit through the middle, but not in the same way not to the extent that El Topo did. I don't think. I think it still is pretty interesting, and it didn't lose me the way that El Topo sometimes loses me. But that ending is kind of divisive, and was even at the time of its release. But I kind of love the fourth wall break. I just like when filmmakers do that. I don't know why, but it always, like, makes me happy when filmmakers break the fourth wall. But like most of the rest of the film, I can't really tell you what Jodorowsky's trying to say by doing that. He says, like, goodbye to the holy mountain, or he says to say goodbye to the holy mountain, real life awaits us. Like, okay, but what is he saying there? Is he saying we need to apply the morals of the film to our real lives? Or is he telling us to say goodbye, not to the holy mountain, like the literal holy mountain in the film, but to the holy mountain, the film itself? Reminding us that after all this crazy stuff that you've been trying to figure out for the last 2 hours, it doesn't really matter. Just get out there and live your life. Say goodbye to the holy mountain. Just forget it. It doesn't matter. You've got a real life to worry about. I kind of like that interpretation, although it doesn't seem very in line with Jodorowsky's way of thinking. But it's a kind of a fun interpretation that I've made for myself for that ending, where he's like, all right, goodbye to the holy mountain. None of this shit means anything. Just whatever you do when you go out of the theater is what matters. I kind of like that interpretation. I also like that. I like to think that this inspired the ending of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, where they break the fourth wall and they're all of a sudden on a film set, because that movie came out just like 2 years after this, to 75. And there's, that some of the Pythons were Jodorowsky fans. There's no way that Terry Gilliam didn't see this movie in the theater and love it,
Right. So. It is cool that he uses, like, the basic, like, elements of some, like, that the bare bones of how am I trying to say this? Like, the bare bones of a story that, like, make you intrigued, like, even in El Topo, like, the guy, like, going to meet these, like, different tasks or whatever, know, it's the same as, like, Hercules or any number of heroes' journeys. Yeah. So, and then this one is just, yeah, like it's like all these stories of these different people. I do like that he breaks it up with like these different things. It's just, I think he throws like so much shit in there. Like
it can be a little overwhelming.
Yeah.
And a little muddied.
Now, I did read one person talk about this that I think it was like a film historian that mentioned this, and I had never thought of it this way. Fuck him for making me think of it this way. But he was talking about how it was as though Jodorowsky had predicted cinema today, where the visuals would overwhelm the narrative. That like it was more about how much he could hit you with visually instead of like how much the story mattered. And I was like, son of a bitch. Like, what? Like, I refuse to listen to you, sir.
I mean, Jodorowsky was he was forward thinking, which was proved later with, we'll talk about it in a minute, but with his failed Dune project. I mean, so there's stuff in that had never been seen in film before that are like cliche now in science fiction. So I mean, he may have been more forward thinking than we thought, you know?
Yeah, it's tough, man, because it's like I really am sitting here and as we're talking, like I don't know what to think. I still don't know what to think about him. Like I mean, it's easy to argue the guy's a piece of shit. That's fine. We can argue that. Or we don't even need to argue he is. But, no, I just I think that he's a really good filmmaker, and you can't knock the guy for his drive and his dedication and his ability to get shit done. Like his, he, like Sinatra said, he did it his way.
Yeah.
He, you know,
that song about Jodorowsky.
I think so.
Yeah, I thought so.
And at the same time, I'm like, if your true purpose is to, and I already kind of said this, but if your true purpose is to enlighten the world, then are you really achieving that purpose with this film? If he didn't add that in, he was just like, I just need to get everything I felt on screen, then like you definitely couldn't argue that. Like,
no, you did.
Oh, you sure did.
You got it all, butthole and everything.
Yeah, but I don't know. It's like because even some of the story, you're like with the butthole or with the ball chopping and all this other stuff, like some of the ways he like portrays things, you're like, fuck, man, did you
have to go that hard?
Yeah, did you have to go this hard? And there's some really questionable stuff too, man. Like the I get like kind of with the girls with the prostitutes, the little girl and the guys like kissing on her head. That was an uncomfortable scene.
Yeah.
But I'm like, all right, maybe it's just like talking about like, you know, we're taking childhood and exploiting it and like all of this other stuff.
Yeah.
Whatever.
I mean, the little girl is one of the prostitutes as well. Yeah, you know, she's dressed the same as them, and I think that actress's mother was one of the other.
Yeah, I think so. Well, the other problem is like, you know, then you've got stuff that happens like, you know, there was the whole controversy apparently with like Brontes was in this movie, like in a part with that. I think it was that same little girl, but I'm not 100% sure.
From the deleted scene.
Yeah, and they're naked together.
Yeah.
And...
Well, she's naked. He's not.
Oh yeah, that's right. She's naked.
And I don't know if it was Brontes or not, but it was definitely another like.
I looked at a couple of places that say it is Brontes, so I don't know,
I mean, you only see her from like the back, but
and it was like used as the German poster.
It was used as the poster in Germany, yeah, which is very strange. But yeah, they're like laying in what looks like a church, and there's a crucifix made of televisions in front of them, I think.
Marilyn Manson loves that.
Yeah, you know, he used that. I mean, yeah, Marilyn Manson loves this guy, which is not a great thing. It doesn't shine a lot of great light on Jodorowsky's character that he inspires Marilyn Manson, especially knowing what we know about Manson now. But yeah, I mean, he absolutely took that from that movie, from this movie.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just, it's weird. There's like little things like that still like kind of bother you about him.
Of course. Yeah.
I mean, especially after our discussion on El Topo with all the shit, like I feel like I'm on like high alert for like, all right, what the fuck are you doing right now? And
right.
So that scene with the little girl like kind of bugs me. How many naked kids there are in general in this movie start to bug me. And then like it's,
I think after this series, We've met our naked little boy quota for the podcast for a while, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I know that society's in a different place now than it was then. So, like, you get a little. I was in the backyard yesterday, and our dog was barking at the fence for the house behind us. And it was because there was a little girl playing over there, and Willow, she was barking at this little girl, and the little girl's like trying to talk to her. And I had shoes on, and Jennifer didn't have shoes on, and she was standing there. She was like, "Go get her." And I was like, "Okay." But then the girl started talking to the dog, and I was like, "I don't know, man. It's kind of weird if I walk over there with like the little girl at the fence." And I'm like, maybe I'm overly paranoid.
I think you're being a little over paranoid. You are allowed to talk to children.
I was like, is it creepy if, like, I don't know. I also think about, like, have you ever heard that, like, Brian Posehn bit where he's just like, if you look like me, you can't get away with certain stuff. He's like, there's just things I don't get to say, like, or things I don't get to do. Like, I can't dig in my backyard at night. He's like, I don't get to walk by people and go like, "Cute kid."
That was a good Brian Posehn voice, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, before we start wrapping things up on this one, Gary, you listened to the commentary. Were there any other fun facts you came across?
Well, let's look and see. Yeah, I did definitely make some notes from the commentary. Some neat little stuff I thought were like when the guy first makes it to the Rainbow Room and the guru, the tower, the alchemist, like first gets off the throne and stuff. His shoes are based on Frankenstein. I just thought that was interesting. Yeah. He loves Frankenstein. We've mentioned that, but the platform shoes.
Yeah.
He was just real into Frankenstein, and that's why he wanted to finally get his Frankenstein reference in there, I guess. Randomly, like in the commentary, he just is talking and he starts going off on the Buddha and Freud. He talks about like how when the thief is being transformed, he's like both of them are against being bored. He says Freud says the greatest sin is to be bored. He says when you're bored, you create an ego that wants to be the universe. It wants to be God but can't be. Buddha says apart from illness, old age, and death, being bored is the greatest tragedy because to be bored is to enter pain. He wanted to be freed from the chains of being bored and reborn. Damn it! They are both wrong. I am against psychoanalysis and Buddhism. Stop it. It's wonderful to be bored. It's wonderful to be ill because illness becomes your master. It's wonderful to grow old because it makes you wiser. It's wonderful to die because being immortal would be boring.
Wow,
that's a thing. Yeah. He actually admits at one point, by the way, when they do the first little tarot card thing, he does say he's been studying tarot since 23. He says he was still learning it at the time, and he didn't quite understand it yet, even when he made the Holy Mountain. So the paintings that are around them in the circle, he said he made those. Like they are his own designs. And he says, I was pretentious. I tried to create my own tarot. I should not have done that. It's sacred art. I didn't quite understand the tarot when I made this film.
Oh, interesting. I don't understand it at all.
Yeah, but I was like, wow, well, at least he has some. Wow, there's some humble and generosity.
Yeah. How about
that? Since we had the conversation about art and how I feel about art, I do have this quote from the commentary. Before that, though, I did not know this, but the character of Bobby, who's the redhead that the guy who is it Venus, who's got the factory with the women, or he gets them all pregnant and stuff.
Yeah. The first guy.
Bobby was apparently a transsexual, and it was part of the San Francisco Coquettes, he says. It's the most beautiful transsexual he'd ever seen in his life. He had to have her. So he put her in the film. Anyway, she gets covered in the boss's sperm, and it's made of little hearts. Because that's what.
Yeah, I remember that scene. She pours them all in her mouth.
Yeah, this boss's sperm is little hearts. It's so romantic.
How romantic! Wow.
But he has this quote. I always wonder what the purpose of art is. Are artists the jesters of society? It's a bit like smoking. People smoke to enjoy themselves, but it is an entertainment that kills. When you go to the cinema and are treated like a 12-year-old child, you have a good time, but you come out more stupid each time. Cinema is making audiences stupid. It's treating them like babies. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to wake people up. I wanted to wake up a society that's been ill since the Middle Ages. I must make films that heal. Art is good when it heals, when it's therapeutic. I wanted my films to have an emotional impact on people, to cause an unconscious reaction. So people would either leave the theater changed, charged, or with a new energy, to leave with some kind of revelation. Something. It had to be more than just entertainment, after which you are a stupid child.
What do you think Jodorowsky thinks of the Marvel movies?
That is literally what I thought. And I actually have something for that. Hold on. I don't think we mentioned Don Cherry, who helped compose the movie with Jodorowsky. He talks about he was looking for spiritual musicians, and he came across he saw him like dressed as sort of a cloud with a suit that was like pieced together. He said Don Cherry's wife. Don Cherry is a jazz musician, fusion musician, plays a trumpet, I believe, a broken trumpet. So this is more just his style. He said that his wife was Swedish, an avant-garde artist, and all of their possessions came from like rubbish bins in New York, and so they just found free stuff in the trash basically, and that was everything they had. And all of his clothes for performances were made from bits and pieces of stuff that she would put together for him to wear. You know, he invented, earlier I mentioned this, he invented apparently painting your nails black for dudes. He also says in the modern art scene, which were all designed, by the way, by a Mexican artist named Felgueres. He had him design all the pieces to be like put together with humans. He was pissed off with him when the movie came out because he said he worked so hard, they only got a few seconds of screen time, and he was like, he did not understand that these would be seen for an eternity.
Yeah, that's showbiz, baby.
But anyway, he said, I also made fun of modern art in the scene. I invented painting with the buttocks.
Oh, wow. No one else had ever done that, huh?
Right.
Congrats.
Yeah. So, good for him.
Yeah.
So back to what we were talking about just a second ago, the scene where they're talking about the Peruvian kids or the kids that are like changing and stuff, and then the blah blah blah. He talks about the Peruvian revolution that would come later. He said he foresaw that. That's why he made this whole scene. So maybe he did, maybe he did. I don't know. But he has a quote here. This goes in different places, but here it goes. Peru's problems appeared in this film long before they happened. The world is very ill. The world needs to heal the seas, the rivers, the environment, society, money. It must heal itself. We're all ill. The artist must react. The artist must be a healer. Cinema must be sort of revelation. Audiences should not identify with heroes or a hero who is generally a pervert. James Bond is a pervert. Superman is a pervert. Superman. Imagine him with a woman. He would have an ejaculation so big that it would destroy her body, exit through her brain, and destroy an entire building. Superman is a being who can't even make love because he would kill his partner.
Well, what if it was Wonder Woman?
Yeah, but there's that. So too bad you weren't hosting the commentary.
Hard to argue against the James Bond point, honestly.
And then the only other part from the commentary that I really, really loved was he talks about the I forget again which planet they are, but the guy who's laying in the bed and has the weird lady that's like dancing over him with the green hair, and she's kind of heavier set. And,
the older lady who's on the really tall toilet.
Glad you mentioned that. So so she has no belly button, which was part of the thing that he loved about her.
The actress does not have a belly button?
Does not have a belly button.
How is that biologically possible?
She has a scar there, so I think some sort of surgery must have happened at some point. He said she was some person that just now that we're talking about it, the guy in the scene, was a guy who tried to seduce him at a bar one night. And so he liked him, and he pulled off his wig at one point, and he had a bald head. He was just like, I love this guy. He's great. I want him. And then she was like a person who was constantly around Mexican studios, like trying to get extra work, and everybody thought she was super weird. But one day he talked to her because she had green hair, and then she showed him she even had a pubic wig that was also green.
Yep,
so,
big old merkin.
Yeah. So, oh yeah, I forgot there's a name for that.
Yeah, it's a merkin.
So he hired her. Anyway, so they hired that. Then there's the tall toilet. And he says during that scene, quote, I loved building that tall toilet. That's my golden dream, to sit on a toilet with my legs dangling. That's the perfect mystical toilet. I thought that the force of falling excrement could create free electricity. If you raise the toilet and shit, the turds generate electricity when they fall. If all mankind shitted from a 2-meter high toilet, we would have all of the electricity we wanted.
Oh, let's do that. Who needs cold fusion?
I was like, wow, Hodo, you're just busting out some hits.
If you just like pulled any of his quotes like and presented them to somebody without any context, like what they would.
What are you talking about? This had context. There was a lady shitting on the tall toilet. It still sounds fucking weird. Like, what are you talking about, dude?
How does she get up there? Is there a little?
You're
ladder?
trying to make electricity on the movie set? What are you saying?
I remember when I was watching that scene, and she like yells at him to about there being a hole in the ceiling, which is just like a window, and he immediately like gets out of the bathtub and starts hammering at it. Like he pulls out a hammer and a board. I was like, why did he have a hammer by the bathtub? And then I thought to myself, with everything else going on in this scene, why is that my concern?
That's the one thing that bothers you.
That's the thing that bothers me.
He said when this movie got made that one of the things I love from him is he said at the end, this was made with a free mind and not for money, which isn't good for the industry. They didn't like that, but it's okay. I can wait. 30 years is nothing. I'm prepared to live over 100. And so he is, he was cool with it.
He was. Well, after he'd finished The Holy Mountain, Jodorowsky had hoped to make a pirate film for children called Mr. Blood and Miss Bones, which sounds like, any other kid's movie title, right? But Alan Klein had no interest in a PG-rated family film, and instead he proposed that Jodorowsky film an adaptation of Pauline Reggie's notorious novel Story of O, which I'd heard of, but I didn't know anything about it, so I looked it up on Wikipedia, and Wikipedia describes it as a tale of female submission involving a beautiful Parisian fashion photographer named O, who is taught to be constantly available for oral, vaginal, and anal intercourse, offering herself to any male who belongs to the same secret society as her lover. She is regularly stripped, blindfolded, chained, and whipped. Her anus is widened by increasingly large plugs, her labium is pierced, and her buttocks are branded.
If you had pitched this to me as like, oh, hey, this is the next movie we're talking about from Jodorowsky, I'd be like, yeah.
That sounds about right. Jodorowsky rejected the project because he felt it was too commercial. So he's like, no, that's way too mainstream for me. So I'm not going to do that. It was eventually adapted by a director named Just Jakin, who was the French director of the original Emmanuel. Came out in 1975 and was pretty poorly received. So Alan Klein was he was angry when Jodorowsky refused to make Story of O because he had already promised this adaptation to various investors, which was, that's your problem, dude. But in retaliation, Klein made El Topo and The Holy Mountain, to which he held the rights, completely unavailable to the public for more than 30 years. That's why in 2007, when the DVD release of both of those films, when these films were both released on DVD, that's why that was such a big deal, because for years you could see Fondo and Lis, you could see some of his, you could see Santa Sangre, but these movies were never released on VHS, they were never released on any sort of video, never released in theaters at all for those 30 years. Alan Klein just held them hostage, basically, out of spite.
Well, again, and not to jump in too early here, but that also feels like the kind of thing that, well, like I feel like we've had this conversation about censorship a lot of times, but like when you try to like completely shut something down, sometimes it just makes it like stew in people's brains even more.
Because these films are notorious, and people like film people knew about them, but they had no way to see them, so they were building them up in their mind for decades.
Yeah, I had not heard this story until that film historian thing I mentioned earlier, where he was talking about, whatever, the predicting, like overwhelming you with the narrative or the visuals and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, one of the parts of that discussion was he was saying that, he remembers being just anxious to see the Holy Mountain again. Like he couldn't stop thinking about it because he had seen the Holy Mountain, but you couldn't just go pick up the Holy Mountain and watch it. And so it was just like building in his brain that the Holy Mountain was this thing. And so, I mean, maybe that's part of it too.
Yeah. Well, after that, Jodorowsky became involved in an ambitious attempt to adapt Frank Herbert's Dune to the big screen. His Dune film was to star Jodorowsky's son Brontes as Paul Atreides, and it was going to feature performances by Orson Welles, Salvador Dali, Gloria Swanson, David Carradine, Udo Kier, and Mick Jagger.
I mean, I'd watch it.
Yeah, absolutely. Originally, the film was to be scored by the groundbreaking electronic music pioneer Karl-Heinz Stockhausen and English experimental rock group Henry Cow, and a French prog rock band called Magma, with each band providing the sounds for various planets in the film. Like each planet was going to have their own soundtrack, which is a fun concept. Later on, it was just the plan was changed, and Pink Floyd was going to score the film. So Jodorowsky set up a pre-production unit in Paris consisting of British artist Chris Foss, French comic book illustrator Jean Girard, better known as Mobius, and H.R. Geiger. Foss, who specialized in sci-fi novel covers, he started designing the film's spaceships and hardware, while Mobius began designing creatures and characters for the film. And then Mobius also storyboarded the entire film. Like Jodorowsky basically says, Mobius was my camera. I told him what I wanted to see, and he, like, every single moment of the film was storyboarded by Mobius. And then H.R. Giger, what did we decide on when we did Alien? Giger or Geiger? I don't remember. Geiger, Giger, Jodorowsky, Hodorowsky, whatever. But Geiger designed Harkonnen Castle based on Mobius's storyboards. Now, if all of this sounds a little familiar, and maybe because we touched on this a bit during our Dan O'Bannon series back whenever that was, a couple years ago, I guess. It was one of our early series here on the podcast. But impressed by O'Bannon's special effects work on John Carpenter's Dark Star, Jodorowsky hired O'Bannon to be the special effects supervisor on Dune, and O'Bannon was flown out to Paris, where he worked on the film for 6 months. So by late 1976, more than a year after Dune had been announced, the film's American backers pulled out. Frank Herbert traveled to Paris to find that $2 million of the film's initial $9.5 million budget had already been spent in pre-production alone, and that Jodorowsky's script, which Herbert says was the size of a phone book, would have resulted in a 14-hour film. Now, if you want to really dive into all of this, I would highly recommend the documentary Jodorowsky's Dune. You get to see a lot of the work that they did on the film. I mean, they got as far as they worked on it for 2.5 years or something total, but you get to see a lot of the work that Mobius did on the film. You get to see costumes. They constructed a couple of costumes. You get to see a lot of Chris Foss's work on the film. They interview Chris Foss throughout it. They interview Geiger. Geiger used some of his designs were later used in, like, that Harkonnen Castle. It's in Prometheus. Like, that design is used in Prometheus, almost exact. So it's really interesting because, even though this Dune is one of the most famous unmade films ever made. I mean, it would have been incredibly ambitious. This was before Star Wars, keep in mind. So this could have changed if this had come out, especially with the stars that he wanted in it. Like, it could have changed the course of blockbuster filmmaking if this had come out before Star Wars. Like, it literally could have changed the course of how movies look now. But it never got made. The money fell through. It was just far too ambitious. There were things that he had planned that would have almost been impossible to do in, the mid 1970s. But all was not lost. When he returned back to the U.S., Dan O'Bannon started working on several screenplays, one of which, called Memory, would eventually be released as Ridley Scott's Alien. And O'Bannon was largely responsible for getting Chris Foss and H.R. Geiger involved in that project. Chris Foss, of course, he designs like the Nostromo, the spacesuits and all that, and you all know what H.R. Geiger did on Alien, I'm sure. So the rest is history. But I think it's safe to say that had it not been for Dune kind of imploding, we might not have ever gotten Alien. I mean, there's a very good chance that it would have never happened. And we may not have gotten Star Wars, honestly. If this had come out, Star Wars may not have ever had a chance to get made because it kind of would have done what Star Wars was doing, but several years earlier.
I hate thinking about that.
That alternate history.
Yeah, he's just got so much, like, fucking Jodorowsky here is just, he's just right in the thick of it. Like he dictated the future of cinema.
I mean, honestly, like, as much as you can say like El Topo changed film history by creating the Midnight Movie, the most impactful thing that Jodorowsky was ever involved in my opinion, is Dune, because of what it spawned and what it could have created. Like, as far as like the way films were seen, like, had it existed, it would have been like unlike anything. It would have been like another 2001: A Space Odyssey. It would have been like unlike anything that anyone had ever seen before. And then, afterwards, it's the things that they created for Dune continued like to reverberate through films for decades and still are, honestly. So after Dune, I mean, Jodorowsky, he says that experience changed his life. He was initially disappointed and bitter about the implosion of the movie, but it was on Dune that he met his greatest creative partner, which is Mobius, with whom he would create the hugely influential comic book, The End Call, using many of the unused concepts from Dune. So a lot of the drawings and stuff that Mobius had done for Dune got recreated in The End Call. And that comic, which has its roots very deep in the tarot and its symbols, and I'm reading The End Call right now. It's very, very good. I fully admit that I don't understand all of like the references to the tarot, but they're used in a way where if you don't, you can still enjoy the story, But that was originally published in installments in the magazine Metal Hurlant, which if you've listened to our heavy metal episode in that Dan O'Bannon series, would later become known as the magazine Heavy Metal here in the U.S. And The End Call is generally considered one of the greatest graphic novels of all time. The copy I have, Gary, has an introduction, a foreword written by Brian Michael Bendis, who all he does is gush about how comic books would not look the same today if it were not for the influence of this specific graphic novel. And it would go on to inspire not just comic books, but movies, Akira, Blade Runner. The sets in Blade Runner are straight out of The End Call. The Matrix, like William Gibson, stuff like that. Like all of that stuff has its kind of has their origins in this comic book from the mid 70s is when they started writing it. Even depictions of like the planet Coruscant, that's a full city planet in the Star Wars prequels, that's very much out of The End Call. So we talk about Dune being this major influential thing. It's not just because of like Alien becoming out of that, but all the stuff, because Dune imploded, The End Call was created, and because The End Call was created, all these other movies got their inspiration from it. Like it's pretty incredible how much was inspired by that project. Now, Jodorowsky did complete one other film during the 70s, although it wasn't released until November of 1980, and it's a movie called Tusk. It was described by Variety as a G-rated epic about the entwined fate of an English girl and a rogue elephant born in India on the same day. Shot completely in the South Indian state of Kamataka at a cost of about $5 million, so higher than any budget he had already. The movie featured 110 live elephants, and Tusk was scheduled to open in the summer of 1980 in the U.S., but it was never released. When it was reviewed at Filmex, Variety described it as, quote, a 2-ton turkey, grandiose, pretentiously simple, totally inconsistent, going on to say that turgid BO looms. So I have not seen Tusk. Has never been released in the U.S. on home video or any other form. I did find a kind of shitty looking copy on YouTube, but I haven't gotten around to watching it, mostly because everything I've read about this movie, including from like people who are huge Jodorowsky fans, say that it sucks. Like even the book, The 7 Lives of Alejandro Jodorowsky, that I've used as a reference on some of these episodes, which is mostly praising a lot of his work. Even in there, they're like, yeah, this movie was kind of like a major failure. So it doesn't really make me want to sit down for 2 hours with it. So for the next several years after Tusk, Jodorowsky would primarily focus on his comic book work, primarily on the End Call. I mean, the End Call ran for almost a decade, I think, and it has spawned its own sequels years later. But he would return to filmmaking in 1989 with the Mexican-Italian co-production, which will be the subject of the 4th and final episode in our Jodorowsky series. The movie we're talking about on our next episode is Santa Sangre. And that'll be it. We'll be done with Jodorowsky. Santa Sangre, I think, is maybe one you might like a little bit better, Gary, if I'm predicting.
Well, we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
I bought, as you were telling me about the End Call, I bought it on Amazon.
Yeah.
So
Nice technology. It's really good. The End Call is really good. I would like to read. I mean, I haven't finished it yet, but it's really good so far. And I mean, you have to read it like it was done in installments, so like very, very short. A few pages before it kind of abruptly ends and goes on to the next episode. But once you get used to that, it's easier to follow, because it does, like, you're like just getting into it and all of a sudden that issue ends and it goes on to the next one, because it was going, in short 5 or 6 pages at a time in heavy metal. But it's definitely worth reading. It's really cool. I mean, the visuals alone, Mobius's art is incredible. He's one of the best that's ever done comic books. I mean, he's incredible.
That's exciting. Santa Sangre, I did read a little bit about that. It's another person that Jodorowsky really loves is Todd Browning. Todd Browning, and Freaks is one of his movies, but he also had a movie called The Unknown, and Santa Sangre is apparently like inspired by The Unknown.
Yeah. Maybe that should be a further viewing on that one. Oh, we haven't done further viewing, have we?
We have not done further
son
viewing.
of a bitch. Well, before we wrap things up, what would be your further viewing for The Holy Mountain, Gary?
Well, I would say if you search for it, Lucifer Rising by Kenneth Anger, from 1972, is you can get a high quality version of it on YouTube right now for free. And maybe if I ever get it together, you can find it on the Cinema Shot channel when you're listening to this. But we'll see. But I do know that it is available. You can watch it, and it's super fucking weird. But the colors and the visuals, the stuff, you can totally watch it and be like, all right.
It's only about, half an hour long, right?
It's like half an hour long. Yeah. But you can tell they're buddies. You can see why they'd be friends.
Right. Well, my further viewing for this one is a little movie called Doggy Woggy's Poochie Woochies, created by Everything Is Terrible. Everything Is Terrible. They're like they take like the VHS clips and edit them together. I love everything that they do, but they decided they were going to make a feature-length film comprised entirely of VHS rips of from dog movies about dogs, scenes with dogs. But then they decided, you know what? Let's not just make a full-length movie using dog clips. Let's make it a remake of Alejandro Jodorowsky's The Holy Mountain, solely using clips from dogs from other movies. and it's I watched them back to back yesterday. I watched the Holy Mountain and then Doggy Walkies, Woochy Woochies immediately afterwards, and it was a hell of an experience. And I would recommend doing the same. It was great. You can find it. It's on. I mean, I bought it directly from Everything Is Terrible's website, and they threw in a bonus disc that is 2.5 hours of Jerry Maguire themed content. So there's also, they might throw in something extra for you. So anyway, Doggies Woggies, Poochie Woochies, that's my further viewing for this week. And that wraps up our episode on the Holy Mountain. Unless you have anything else to add, Gary?
No, I hope you all feel inspired. I hope you've been injected with some psycho magic.
I guess we'll have to talk about psycho magic at some point. I'm going to watch that documentary. I haven't seen it, but I'm going to watch it.
It's this is by the end of this, because you listen to this podcast, you're going to be enlightened. You're going to be an evolved human being.
Yeah, this is all. These episodes are the journey. This is the journey that these characters take within the movies. That's what you're doing by listening to this series, right?
I'm saying all that as though 97% of you didn't drop off after Fondo Elise.
I hope our listeners are a little more loyal than that, but who knows? I mean, we lost one of our co-hosts.
Yeah, we did lose a co-host already, so I don't know. This has been quite the journey.
Maybe next week it'll just be me talking to myself here.
Just a little monologue from Justin on Santa Sangre.
Well, I think that's all we have for this week. Until next time,
may the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
And be excellent to each other.